Hello there, welcome to Bruxelles Je t'aime, Euronews' talk show all about the European capital of Brussels. On Brussels, my love, we pick apart some European stories. Check what's at stake for you and for Europe. My name is Maeve McMahon. Thanks for joining us. Coming up this week, 10 months after expressing their interest, Finland joins NATO, putting an end to their policy of military non-alignment. Russia, who shares a border of 1,340 kilometres with Finland, is put out, said this could increase the chance of conflict. Meanwhile, the EU Commission President and the French President were in Beijing this week, trying to connect with China and trying to prevent a global proxy war. And cracking down on greenwashing, companies claiming products they sell are environmentally friendly. The EU Commission has put a much-awaited proposed legislation on the table to try to get hold of this unregulated world of green advertising. The plan aspires to penalise companies dressing products up as organic. So we're asking if it'll work and what exactly it will mean for consumers and for business. To talk about all this and much, much more, I'm joined here in our studio by Bruno Lette, Security and Defence Specialist with the German Marshall Fund. Tommy Huuttanen, the Executive Director of the Wilfred Martin Centre. And Terry Schulz, an EU NATO freelance reporter. Thank you so much for being with us. And before we hear your thoughts, let's just find out why the NATO alliance went from having 30 members this week to 31. Christopher Pitchers has more.
February the 24th, 2022. Russia invades Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin justifies this in part by saying his country feels threatened by NATO expansion at its border. The military alliance and its 30 members deny posing any risk to Russia, with no immediate plans to expand in numbers. But this soon changes. Not long after the outbreak of war, long-time neutral countries Finland and Sweden apply for NATO membership. Finland becomes its 31st member, while Sweden's application to this day remains blocked by both Turkey and Hungary. For now, NATO's focus remains for the most part on Russia and Ukraine. But as the conflict develops, blocs have emerged, and one that the military alliance is slowly starting to take more seriously, namely China. The Asian giant has become the Kremlin's key ally in the war in Ukraine, and is sure to be a red marker on NATO's map in the near future. How it handles the threat posed by Beijing now, though, may very well determine the shape of things to come.
Christopher Pitchers reporting there on the threat of China to the NATO alliance, a topic that was widely discussed this week when NATO met for talks. But first, let's talk with our panel about this enlargement. Terry, I would like to start with you because you were, of course, on the ground at NATO all week reporting on this. What was the mood like, and what will this mean for the alliance?
It was both, I would say, ebullient. The Finns were absolutely delighted that they had overcome these obstacles with the last-minute Turkish and Hungarian rejection or lack of approval of their ratification, and that they had made it into the alliance. You know, this was a really radical change for Finland, but they were also, I think, somber because this was leaving behind decades of non-alignment. This is really a shift for Finland, and it happened so quickly just since the invasion of Ukraine that public opinion changed in favor of NATO membership.
Well, indeed, it's amazing what a difference a year can make, because I was looking at polls from last year just before the invasion of Ukraine, and one poll said that only 26% of the Finnish people were in favour of joining, but that obviously dramatically changed when the world changed after the 24th of February. So how are Finns back home, because you're of course Finnish, feeling this week?
Yeah, indeed, this is a very emotional moment for Finns. And of course, but not only because of the security situation in Ukraine, but indeed, this is a historic moment after Second World War. Finland has been kind of being there, trying to balance between Russia and West, and only now, in this moment, Finland is truly fully integrated to West. There's a lot of opportunities, and culturally, I think it's a great moment. But as mentioned, at this stage, we are also, the Finns are concerned about a little bit, or the bitter taste is left by the Swedish case, which are still because of Hungary, Turkey, and so that's a very important interest.
We'll come to that in a minute, but first let's hear from you, Bruno. You're a NATO watcher for many years, and you remember back in 2019 when people like the French President Emmanuel Macron were saying the alliance was brain dead, and now really this was quite frankly a massive PR exercise for the alliance this week, seeing that flag fly high and be raised earlier in the week.
Yeah, well, the alliance is not brain dead. I think it also shows that actually enlargement is still possible for NATO as well. It's fabulous news to have Finland on board. Not only is it really a mighty military force that now joins NATO, but I'm also particularly pleased because let's not forget Finland is one of the few nations in history that actually won a war against Russia, the so-called Winter War. So I think that Finland is really a great asset for NATO, but vice versa, of course, Finland will also benefit from NATO structures.
And that's also the opinion of the Secretary-General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg. He didn't hide his delight this week when the Finnish flag was raised at the NATO headquarters here in Brussels. We can take a listen now to Jens Stoltenberg and also to the President of Finland, that's Sauli Niinistö.
President Putin wanted to slam NATO's door shut. Today, we show the world that he failed. Instead of less NATO, he has achieved the opposite, more NATO. And our door remains firmly open.
It is a great day for Finland if people can live in secure, stable circumstances. That's the basic element of happy life.
Would you agree with that, Tommy?
Totally. And even those who maybe a year ago, as you mentioned, were doubtful about NATO and to joining in, I think they are very, very relieved because these moments with Hungary and Turkey, they were causing a lot of stress, and I think there's a big relief now.
Because this, of course, will come with obligations, Terry Schulz. Joining NATO, it means, but military service, I believe, is obligatory in Finland.
That's right. Finland never.
Ready for fight.
That's right. Finland never dropped conscription. One of the few countries. It remains absolutely at the ready to go to war at any moment. Perhaps more than any other country in Europe, it was prepared to defend this border, which we should say is more than 1,300 kilometers, more than 800 miles, by itself forever. Finland did not intend to join NATO anytime soon, so they have perhaps the best equipped military in all of Europe. It was prepared to do this alone, and as Bruno mentioned, and every Finn will mention to you, the Winter War history remains very much in their mind. If we have to do it alone, we can and we will. But right now, we're very happy we won't have to.
And we heard there Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary-General of NATO, expressing that the door is very much open. But of course, the Ukrainians were here as well this week participating in that meeting, and they don't really feel like that door is open until, of course, the war is solved.
Well, enlargement is not only a technical process where military forces have to integrate in NATO structures, it's also a political process. And of course, also when a new member wants to join the NATO alliance, all the existing members have to agree on that. And right now we simply see that for Finland it was quite easy. All the existing NATO members agreed to have Finland join. But for Ukraine right now, we don't see this unity yet. That's why things take a little bit longer for Ukraine right now, and Ukraine is not yet a member.
We should point out also that Ukraine had expressed interest in being a member of NATO before, and its road would have been long even without a war. And so that's why right now the wall seems so high. And the Ukrainians are actually saying, in some ways, the fact that a war is being waged in our territory should give us a quicker entry into NATO. This is how you could really help us win. All of you are saying, help us win this war. Let us in, come to defend us.
Exactly. The issue is not really now the NATO membership, but our support to Ukraine.
Has it been sufficient, do you think, Tommy?
It has been a lot, but we can see it's not sufficient, unfortunately. Much more is needed, and we will see until where the European willingness go.
Do you feel we're in a bit of a long war mode here?
Well, it's definitely not a short war. I mean, we've been going on more than a year now, and even though the Ukrainians are trying very hard to prepare now a counteroffensive to push the Russians back, they will need our help more. The Russians have not given any sign that they're willing to give up. They actually keep throwing things at this war. So I'm afraid that this will still take a little while. Yes, indeed.
And Terry Schulz, just on defence spending, we heard this week Jens Stoltenberg alluding to it, saying that the Allies are spending more, that things have changed. Is that true?
It is true, but still very few allies of the now 31 are spending the 2% that has been the goal since the Wales Pledge. And that was in 2014. They're still not there, even though they were aiming to move towards is the kind of wishy-washy language, move towards 2%. Many of them are not there, and now Stoltenberg is saying it needs to be higher than 2%. That should be the floor, and that should be the floor and not the ceiling. And we are now going to speak ahead of this Vilnius summit in July. We need a new number, and we also need to strengthen the language compelling countries to do this. They can't legally force them to spend any percent of their GDP on their militaries, but they're going to make the pressure harder.
And Terry mentioned that Vilnius summit, the NATO summit taking place in July. And one aspiration as well of the alliance is to make sure that Sweden, as you mentioned earlier, is by then a member of the NATO alliance. It's been blocked now by Turkey and, of course, as well by Hungary.
I don't have a glass ball, but I think that when it comes to Turkey, there's also something that we need to consider about Turkey's election, the presidential elections coming up. I think Sweden have been an element in Erdogan using this for gaining popularity at home. So many observers are hopeful that the Turkish veto will disappear after the Turkish elections, but it remains to be seen, of course.
Those elections taking place on the weekend, of course, of the 13th of May. And Hungary, NATO member and EU member state, is also holding up that Swedish entry. And the Hungarian Foreign Minister, Peter Szijjártó, he was in Brussels this week. He was at that NATO ministerial. And our Hungarian reporter, Sándor Zsiros, had the opportunity to ask him a question at the press conference and asked him, would he be giving the green light to Sweden anytime soon? Take a listen.
When Hungarian members of parliament hear, for example, from Sweden that Hungary's political system is undemocratic, illegitimate and a dictatorship, they're rightfully sensitive to this. This is because they obtain their mandate through democratic elections, in a democratic way, based on their interactions with the Hungarian people.
Foreign Minister Szijjártó speaking to our Sándor Zsiros. Tommy, politics there getting in the way, tensions between Sweden and Hungary, tensions that perhaps might not go away in time for July.
Yes, and what is significant, in this whole discussion is indeed how the Turkey and Hungary have coordinated very clearly on these issues, number one. And number two, that when the application was discussed, initially Hungary didn't make any remarks. It only came after. And this thirdly, about this linking and declaring it publicly, that's very surprising.
Is it a solvable issue, Terry?
It has to be. People are completely exasperated with Hungary at NATO headquarters. There's really no good reason anybody sees for Hungary to be blocking this. It happens to be more on the EU side. It's actually that Hungary is looking for leverage on this side of town, not that side of town. And they're holding up Sweden for reasons that are not within Sweden's control. People are really, really tired of this.
And the Americans, I'm sure, putting a lot of pressure as well on Hungary and Turkey.
Well, the United States, of course, would like to see Sweden join the alliance as soon as possible, but they are, of course, in talks with Istanbul, with Budapest. But again, if those two countries keep their veto there, there's not much the Americans can do. The only strategy that Washington has been pursuing right now is say, okay, can we do something in return for this? But even that so far hasn't really succeeded, so it remains to be seen.
And they weren't eager to do it either.
Exactly.
OK, well, we have to keep an eye on Sweden's entry. As I spoke to some Swedish analysts this week, and they said it is the million-dollar question. We do not know when we will be able to enter. But speaking of the Americans, Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, he was also in Brussels this week participating in that meeting. And our Greek reporter, Effie Kostakousta, had the chance to sit down with him and ask him about the threat of China that was having on the alliance and China's role when it comes to the war in Ukraine. We can take a listen.
I think China is also trying to have it both ways. It wants to be seen as trying to advance peace, and at the same time, it continues to support Russia in different ways, rhetorically, making its case in international institutions, advancing Russian propaganda about the aggression, and as we've said some weeks ago, even considering providing Russia with lethal assistance.
Antony Blinken there, the US Secretary of State, saying that China is trying to have it both ways. I mean, what game is China playing here?
Well, I think China's only interest here is China. And to be very honest, I think that China benefits greatly from the war in Ukraine. You have the West exhausting itself in there. You have Russia exhausting itself in there. The two parties are exhausting each other. And in the meantime, China just go along and grows and gets more influence on the world stage. So really, I think it's in China's best interest to keep some tensions going on in Eastern Europe right now, so that also to deflect the attention for their own ambitions in Southeast Asia.
And we saw this. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, and that puts Europe in a very difficult position. So we have the security concerns also directed towards Europe. But when we have business interest, and the current visit, Macron, von der Leyen visit today to Beijing is a good example or expression of that. So on the other hand, we have political narrative of de-risking to one extent, and then we have Macron going to Beijing with the huge businessman delegation.
Indeed, this week, in case you missed it, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, was in Beijing. So was Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission president, trying to put pressure on China, trying to have a frank dialogue with China. Did they succeed, Terry Schulz?
I think it's too early to say, but indeed, this is an uncomfortable situation where you see sort of courting of business interests literally at the same time at NATO headquarters. Stoltenberg and Blinken are wagging their fingers and saying, "Don't you dare do it, China." And I think that we heard very strong language at NATO this week because it's significant that they have not seen that China has transferred lethal aid to Russia to help in the war. But we've been hearing for months that they're considering it. So obviously, as Bruno says, they're keeping their options open, but they have clearly seen that it is not ultimately in their interest to help Russia fight Ukraine. And the United States is making clear, as our other NATO allies, we will hurt you if you do this, Beijing.
No, I think also China realized that it's a very delicate balancing exercise. Its actions will be punished on the economic markets. And China has also an interest to keep stability in the global economic markets. So really China is considering its options, and let's see where they go. But the economics in the end is what will direct Chinese actions, I think.
Do you think so? Because I think that's the question after the recent changes in China. I think that's the big question. What is the defining factor? Power politics or economics, and how they are now rebalancing that?
It still does look disjointed, though, to see big delegations with artists and businessmen going as on a friendly venture to China, and then to have the military side of things looking so tenuous at the moment. I think that there are probably some discussions going on between allies. Did you really need to do this right now?
Yeah.
And they were queuing up to go because, of course, China only opened up recently for business and for tourism after many years of a lockdown. Was it bad timing, Bruno, this visit?
Bad timing, good timing. China basically takes its own decisions. But I do think, however, that European attitudes towards China are shifting. Definitely. I mean, the big friend, that image that we had years ago here in Europe, this is no longer the case. I think European approaches towards China are actually more and more sidelining with American approaches too. It's not the same yet. We still see China quite differently in a transatlantic context. But both views on each side of the Atlantic are more and more converging. I believe that.
And you could look at it like the delegations there now could say, this is what you could lose if you transfer those weapons. So I think that as long as they're making the diplomatic point there very strongly, that all of this is off the table if you transfer weapons to Russia to use against Ukraine, perhaps then it does have some good use.
Yeah, and it will also boycott the only goal that China has, to make sure Europe and America don't go together.
True.
Actually, it will bring the transatlantic partners even more together.
But from European side, the focus is in economics. It's firstly about de-risking, trying to be less dependent on China, which is very easy to say, very difficult to do. Secondly, our toolbox on economic cohesion, be able to resist China's economic pressure on political issues like a Lithuania case. But thirdly, we need to be strong. Europe needs to be strong. We have to focus on our own economy and economic transition. That is the base.
And Europe, of course, has to speak with one voice when it comes to China, which it's not doing right now.
Indeed.
And in this case, it also needs to speak with one voice with the United States, because don't forget that the United States also doesn't hesitate to punish even its friends who do business with countries it considers its enemies. So I think that there could be a big divide if China does, again, go back to, if it does provide more significant assistance to Russia, the United States would not hesitate to put up barriers even against European countries.
Indeed, because in Washington, two issues are followed. First of all, what Terry said about this whole European military build-up. There was a lot of talk, 100 billion in Germany, etc., etc. Now the facts are not really matching. And the second is our China policy, because for them, and maybe especially for Republican side, this is priority.
Yeah. Well, of course, the elections, a lot will change as well, perhaps with them. But that's all we have time for, I'm afraid, on this topic on defence. We'll leave defence to the side, and we'll talk next, after this short break, about an EU plan to stop European companies from greenwashing. See you soon here on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, with me, Maeve McMahon, where we're picking apart some of the European stories of the week. Well, one that caught our eye was an EU plan to stop European companies from greenwashing. That's banning producers from advertising their products as eco-friendly if they have no proof. Because, according to the European Commission, around 53% of environmental claims made by companies contain, quote, vague, misleading or unfounded information, while 40% are completely unsubstantiated. And seemingly consumer trust in green claims is extremely low. So I'd like to ask our panel, have you seen the news? What do you think about it? Bruno, we start with you.
Well, I think, first of all, it's all part of a bigger push here in Brussels over the years to pursue a green agenda. We see that the Commission has put forward many different initiatives to green everything, basically.
It's trendy now.
It's very trendy. But this, of course, is the latest one. And it's about fighting a misleading information about whether or not a product that you buy is actually environmental friendly. I mean, look, first of all, I think it comes down to two things, right? First of all, can you fight this? Yes, but then you have to make sure you have good enforcement. And the enforcement will not be done by Brussels, first of all, right? It's going to be done by the individual member states at the national level. So it really boils down to the fact then, will the individual member states actually invest the resources to check everything? So that's number one. And number two, I would say, it also comes down to consumer goods, common sense. If you buy a product from an oil company or a product from a chemical company, if you buy something from a sector that is pollution intensive, even if they say it's environmental friendly, use your common sense, probably there will have been some pollution to produce that product.
So, so I guess it boils down to these two factors. First of all, even if when you are pro-market, you recognize that the actors who are selling items or stuff need to provide correct information on the other hand. But on the other hand, of course, the concern in business is this new regulation, how it will impact our business, and especially as you have various sectors, various products, various countries where you need to implement this regulation. So the concern is that they got it right.
And Terry, do you think, like many documents that come out of Brussels, it might just sit on desks of member states for years and not go anywhere?
This is exactly what I was going to say. As Bruno points out, you'll need a massive mechanism to investigate these claims, to pursue punishment for them, to make them have any force at all. And too often we do see these things go unimplemented by member states who, in the end, can pretty much slow roll anything they want to. And there are many countries who will not take kindly to this kind of legislation. At the same time, I think it's really important to look at this in the bigger picture of misinformation in general and disinformation in general. And the European Union has made this a really big campaign to stop lying from all sides, to empower consumers to make better decisions with their own knowledge. But then again, we also have to put some of the weight on consumers. As Tommy was saying, if you don't want to find out, it's pretty easy to remain ignorant.
Absolutely. Well, there is talk of penalties in that, so we'll see how that goes on as the negotiations continue. But here at Euronews, we were also wondering why it took so long to put this kind of a plan on the table, because this essentially protects consumers. So we caught up with the Croatian socialist MEP who's actually in charge of negotiating this file, and she told us it was due to lobbying by the European business sector. Take a listen now to Biana Borjan.
3.5 billion euros are spent by consumers more because we have this buy, use, discard. It means that if we change this, industry will lose this 3.5 billion euros. And when it comes to money, then problems emerge. Those who are affected by these changes were very active in the past years to make an impact on decision makers. That's the reason why it took so long.
So that's the reason why it took so long, according to that Croatian MEP. Tommy?
In the market, one needs to point out, you have, of course, those actors which are using the possibilities, but also those companies which try to be honest, and sectors who have been trying to be innovative and find their label and own standards. And that's the one reason why we have now such a multiple different labels. And so that from that point of on, I think it's also normal that the process will take some time, has taken some time. It's a complex issue.
Well, not to oversimplify, but if they're not lying, what kind of problem are they going to have?
Yeah, indeed.
I mean, honestly.
And what about you personally when you're shopping? Do you have the environment in mind when you buy products to wash your clothes or creams to put on your face, Bruno?
I don't immediately pay attention, to be very honest. I do appreciate the fact when there's some eco labels on the products, but then usually I have to actually read what these eco labels mean. But if there's such an eco label on it, I will definitely have a look, yes.
And you do see people in supermarkets going around scrutinising the labels. Perhaps we should all do that, but we don't really have time for such luxury.
Yeah, the studies show that people are sensitive about this. So there's kind of two dynamics which are a little bit conflicting. On the other hand, the studies show that those labels have an impact on purchase decisions. But on the other hand, there's a confusion and even distrust. To give an example, biofood, which I buy. So I buy biofood mainly because of my children, number one. But number two, on the same time, even though in Europe it's very well regulated, I have doubt. I'm a little bit with bio labels, all that. I don't trust them so much. But and scientifically, biofood has not been proven that it's not conclusive. It's really healthier. Nevertheless, I do buy it because
that word bio, which
it's also a social thing,
organic,
increasingly.
Yeah. And I don't buy it because I don't believe it, and I'm a dedicated vegetarian. So, for example, for animal rights purposes, and I don't think that I don't think that bio eggs treat the chickens any better unless it says so. And for me, that's what matters. So I think also that people do blindly buy bio without knowing exactly what the conditions are under which those foods are produced, and I don't do it.
Okay. Well, we're almost out of time, but just one more comment on, we heard there how long this could take. I mean, I wonder how it'll go down when it comes to those negotiations. Do you think it will fly, Bruno?
Well, first of all, I think, lobbying is one of the noble activities here in Brussels, and I think it's quite perfectly normal that this is happening. What would you prefer, the European Commission just putting out a regulation out there without consulting anyone? And, just do this? Or would you like actually a process where industry is being consulted, civil society groups are being consulted? And that's actually a whole process that happens in Brussels. Lobbying is part of this. If you want to put out a successful regulation, you need to make sure that you have the buy-in first before putting it out there. So these consultations have happened. The industry has had its say. This consumer organizations have had their say. So I do believe that this has a chance to pass, yes.
This has a chance to pass, okay. Final comment? No?
The goal is to have a good regulation, but as said, the main issue is the implementation in the member states.
It's always about implementation, right? Well, that is, I'm afraid, all we have time for this section, but thank you so much for your insights, and thank you for watching, and we see you soon here on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love, Euronews' weekly talk show that takes a look back at some of the stories hitting the headlines this week. Well, one that turned our heads right around was over in Italy when a proposed draft bill came out suggesting to introduce fines of up to €100,000 on public and private entities who use foreign languages like English instead of Italian in official communications. You can take a look at that Euronews article there on your screen. Have you seen this news and what's your reaction to it, Terry?
Coming from a country where we do so poorly at learning foreign languages, I do not see the point in this. I think that everyone should encourage the use of as many languages as possible. I'm so jealous of the countries like Switzerland or even here like Belgium, where my kids in school are learning 2 languages, French and Dutch, and of course speak English. I can only encourage the use of as many languages as possible. I don't think that makes any sense. And it's never going to fly with the kids. Come on.
This is Italy, though, really trying to protect Italy, its heritage, its language, its culture. It's feeling threatened, Tommy, by English. And
exactly, threatened. And maybe that's the problem. The question really is, will this work, have impact? You could have a kind of turn the tables. You could have made the campaign, La Bella Italia usa l'italiano bello. Positive via, for our culture, our love to our food, etc., etc. It's important to use good Italian, especially in official context, etc. Because now exactly there's a risk of mixing, for example, because the main issue here is English. Okay, so should we then keep investing our language capabilities in education? Is there a contrast now what we are doing politically?
Bruno, what's your take?
I think what we're seeing in Italy is something that we see happening elsewhere in Europe as well. I mean, just think about the French, for instance. They have been language purists like forever. The whole planet is saying computer, but in French you have to say ordinateur. But you also see it happening, for instance, in the Dutch-speaking parts of Belgium. So, I guess it's a bit of a larger movement here where some feel uncomfortable with the fact that in our globalized world, all the cultures are mixing up. But I'm afraid it's a trend that is a little bit unstoppable.
A trend that's a bit unstoppable. Well, it's interesting if you actually read the bill, because it says in the bill the spread of English demeans and mortifies Italian and has repercussions for society as a whole. I mean, that's quite the strong language there.
Yeah, and especially in many places, you see the revival of the original native language. It doesn't have to be that way. And again, I repeat, it's a kind of defensive approach. It gives that, Italian is going to fade away because of English. No, even for me, it doesn't sound,
But this could essentially, if it goes through, impact businesses that are based in Milan, Rome. They want to attract talent from all over the world, but they need to write contracts, write everything in Italian.
Well, I think that most contracts within a country would be in the mother tongue anyway. I can't imagine that companies doing business between each other in Italy write a contract in English. That doesn't make any sense and would never, I don't think anybody could even argue that would go away. But think about the internet, the gamers, a lot of businesses that bring in a lot of money to a country. If you tried to ban English, you're going to lose movies. You're going to lose. I mean, again, I think primarily about online businesses. You can't do it, and I would think you're hurting the Italian citizens as well if they can't be encouraged to use good English, the language of business, the world round.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're closing themselves off, perhaps.
Yeah, but of course the bottom line, as you mentioned, there's a huge discussion about this in Italy, very controversial discussion, and the main issue will this pass a parliament. So there may be many changes and clarifications, and also the fines. Let's see how it plays out.
Of course, and in the bill, it's about official communications for public and private entities. It is quite specific, and I'm sure they'll be debating about it for a long time in Italy too.
I think we're not there yet. I think the main point, first of all, is a political message that culture in Italy matters, but whether or not this will really be enforced strictly, that remains to be seen.
And meanwhile, we're all here desperately trying to learn Italian because everyone I know loves Italy and loves speaking Italian or pretending that they speak Italian, right?
I'm still struggling with French after living in Brussels so long. Bruno's got those two languages down. But I speak Finnish.
Yeah, that's great.
Extra point.
Give us a bit of Finnish there.
Extra point.
Many brownie points on that.
No niin, kiitoksia paljon. That was, thank you very much.
Very impressive.
Okay, well, thank you very much to yourselves, to Terry, Tommy and Bruno for being with us here on Bruxelles Je t'aime. And thank you so much for watching. If you're celebrating Easter this weekend, do enjoy and don't eat too many Easter eggs. And we'll see you soon here on Euronews and Euronews.com.